Welcome back to Storytime with Captain Xavier. I am Chaylo Laurino and I play Captain Xavier, here and in various other places. But I didn't always play the same Captain Xavier that you are familiar with. The Captain Xavier that I originally played was really very different. And today I'm going to be telling this story, because you voted on it, of somebody who helped in many ways shape the Captain Xavier that you all are familiar with now. Though I don't know that he is aware of that, which is somewhat unfortunate. I'm going to be telling two separate stories about Sir Erik Nielson from the Empire of Adria, from back in my angry youth, my angsty youth. Early on, before I was actually Captain Xavier, I was just Xavier de Normandy. I hadn't become a captain yet. And yeah, he was quite possibly one of the most honorable and chivalrous men I have ever met. And one of the few people whose respect I wanted to have, and I don't know that I ever got the chance to actually truly get it. He was the head of the Viking household in the Empire of Adria, up in the subdivision we were on, called, I believe, House Skidbladnir. They were a Scandinavian household. Anyone who wanted a Scandinavian persona, wanted to study Scandinavian history and lore and garb and combat styles and all of that, that was the household that was really the place for them. And there were a lot of people that joined it, and it was a lot of fun. They were generally often allied with House Solstice, but not always. And this was long before the crew existed. Like I said, this was before I was even a captain. And his views on honor and chivalry very much kind of eventually shifted my perspective on a great many things. Adria, the Empire of Adria, kind of adheres to that romanticized fantasy version of chivalry, of honorable knights helping the weak and defending the defenseless, despite the fact that that's not really a historical concept of chivalry at all. Chivalry comes from chevalier, which comes from cheval, which just means horse. Knights are just somebody with a horse, which made them more powerful, which allowed them to become even more powerful, which allowed them to trample the weak, and all of that. But we now have this very romanticized view of what chivalry is and honor and all of that. And there was later chivalric codes that were more of that, but yeah, history is wibbly on that concept in general. But Adria goes with the romanticized view, and Aeryck was very much the embodiment of that, that knights should be honorable, they should be chivalric, they should teach what they know, they should, learn what they can. But not everyone in Adria adhered to that, and I kind of was one of them. Throughout my life, I've always been the lawful good type in general. I was, followed the rules. I was a good student. I tried not to be a bully, though I didn't always succeed. Kids are cruel. But I did get bullied a lot because I have a weird name and because I was a bit of a nerd and all of that. And so I had, confidence issues, and this kind of culminated when I joined the Empire of Adria as, one, wanting to win everything, and two, wanting to play a bad guy. My goal when I first joined as an angsty 18-year-old who'd never kissed a girl was to kind of be the Boba Fett character, the bounty hunter, the mercenary, the bad guy that everybody likes and who always wins. That was the character that I wanted to go for, and I largely kind of achieved it. But it came at the expense of other people to a degree. The mindset that I had was that I wanted to be able to be ruthless and merciless on the field of battle. In actual combat, I didn't want to be, having to stop and let my opponent get up in a war. And for some reason, it didn't occur to me that I could be ruthless in a battlefield, like a full-pitched field battle, but still be chivalrous in a tournament. Somehow I hadn't made that connection, and I wouldn't make that connection until I was like 24, and I had a genuinely life-altering epiphany that very much violently changed my life. And Aeryck was a good part of that, and it was kind of a realization of, he was already that. Why didn't I realize that? But as a result, I was very, wasn't about chivalry. If my opponent dropped his sword in a tournament, I'd just take him out. If he fell down, I'd hit him on the ground, and because I was the evil pirate and, angsty 18-year-old who'd never kissed a girl type. Rubbish. I was a bit of a knob. And that kind of where the story of Aeryck defending my honor came up, because I was a character who didn't have any. That was my whole thing. Was in a tournament. Early light combat tournament, fought with the kendo Shinai. And it was far enough into the game, I'd been playing for long enough that I was one of the better fighters now. I had decided I really wanted to be, because I wanted to win everything, and if I was going to play the Boba Fett character, I had to be a great fighter, so I was really practicing as much as I can, learning as much as I can, and I was starting to get pretty good, but I wasn't the best yet. The Duke at the time, I think he was a Duke, he might have still been a Viceroy, but the leader of the local chapter, the head of House Solstice, Sir Phelan Apar-Durwin, was still by far a better fighter than me, and Sir Erik was probably still a better fighter than me. But I made it in the tournament. It came down to the final, me versus Sir Phelan, and this was before I was knighted. And it had been raining, the ground was slippery, I did not have good boots for fighting in, and I ended up slipping and falling. And rather than letting me up, as chivalry would dictate a knight do, he sat on me and made jokes about me being the throne. And I managed to hit him, and I took him out, and then he ended up going on to winning the tournament, because it was like 3 out of 5, and I think I got that one hit. And I was thoroughly angry and very humiliated, and that's rough on an angsty 18-year-old. And I was sulking in my tent, like you do, and I heard an argument between Sir Erik and Sir Phelan. And Aeryck was arguing that what Phelan had done was wrong, that humiliating his opponent like that not allowing me to get up was unchivalrous, and he is a knight, he is supposed to be chivalrous. And Phelan's argument was, well, Xavier isn't chivalrous and he isn't a knight, so I don't have to be chivalrous to him. And Aeryck's counter-argument was, chivalry isn't about who you show it to, it's about who's showing it. You didn't shame Xavier today, you shamed yourself, and you shamed all knights in Adria. And that really stuck with me, that Aeryck was standing up for me. Sir Erik was standing up for me when I was the embodiment of everything against chivalry. And yet here he was arguing that I had been wronged by this unchivalrous act by the crown. And that was kind of where I realized that this is a man who I, on a personal level, deeply respect. Because again, Chaylo, me, I've always been very chivalrous and always wanted to help people and teach people, and have always done the good thing because it's the right thing to do. I was playing the evil pirate as escapism. It was to get away from all of that and to not have to be myself and get to play this fun French mercenary character. And there was a bit of me that was at that point going, I wish I wasn't Xavier at this point. I wish I could be the chivalrous character and could be someone that Aeryck would respect more, because I wanted that respect at that point. And it started, there did begin to be a bit of a shift where on the one side I still wanted to be ruthless on the field of battle and felt that meant I had to be ruthless in tournaments. And that, I struggled with that for a long time, and the more I got to know the people in Adria outside of Adria, and the more they got to realize, oh, this Captain Xavier schmuck character is just a character. This isn't you at all. And I started to get kind of afraid that they wouldn't let me play Xavier anymore. They're like, oh, you're not really a schmuck. Quit being one in Adria. Like, but I want to be the schmuck in Adria. It's the character. It's fun. It's my fantasy thing. It's neat. And that caused even more trouble. But more and more I started to shift away from that. And also they started to understand that, yeah, this is just a character that I play. And the second time that Aeryck did something for me that meant even, to a degree, even more, was when I got my combat knighthood. There are four things you can get knighthood in Adria: archery, combat, arts and sciences, and ministry. The first one I got was archery, because I was a very good archer. And I got and it's based on the number of tournaments. You have to have fought in a number, you have to have competed in a number of tournaments and gotten a certain number of wins and fought in a certain number of wars and done a certain number of educational demos. And once you have all of the points, you get knighted. It's a point-mate system rather than a more historic you get knighted when somebody fancy enough believes you should get knighted. And I got my archery knighthood, and I had the Duke do it because the crown is supposed to do knighthoods. But when I got my combat knighthood, that was the one that meant the most to me because I enjoyed fighting so much. And I asked Sir Erik if he'd be willing to do it. And I was rather surprised when he agreed. And I asked him if we could do it a little bit more theatrically, because I'm an old theater kid. I love theater. And he absolutely loved the idea. And the fact that he was willing to do the skit, as it were, with me, meant a lot to me, probably a lot more than he ever realized. And so it came down to my last tournament. The last tournament I needed in order to get my knighthood. At this point, I was arguably the best fighter in the local chapter. I could even beat Phelan fairly regularly at this point. And so my plan was, at the end of the tournament, if I win, really I was planning to when I win, because I knew there was nobody locally who could beat me. Then we'd go right into the skit. When I'm announced as the winner, then Aeryck would go into the skit, and it was going to be fun. And then we had some people come to the tournament from somewhere else, and one of them was a better fencer than me at the time. I had only barely started fencing at that point, because I was, I think 19, maybe 20 at this point. I'd only barely started fencing. And so I was better than everybody else, but this guy was a really good, he was a knight from the SCA. He was a very good fencer and had a fencing style that I had never seen before and had no idea how to counter yet. And so Aeryck came up to me and said, from what I've heard, you might not be able to beat this guy. Do you want to change the skit? And I'm like, okay, well, if I don't win, then yeah, we'll come up with something else. If not, we'll see what happens. And so it was a double elimination tournament, and I ended up fighting this guy early on and lost the first time because his style, I had no idea how to counter it yet. And so I then watched him as he decimated everybody else with the same style, and I decimated everyone with my style. And so it came down to us in the final, but he had 0 losses and I had 1 loss. And I really wanted to win. Because I wanted the skit to go off the way I wanted it to, and because I still had that angsty, gotta win everything, self-doubt thing that would take me another decade to get rid of. And so I managed to get a sword, borrow a sword from someone that was about that much longer than his, and just did the exact same move that he did when he did it, but 3 inches further away. And so he would miss and I would hit. And I did that enough times because he had his style, but apparently it wasn't terribly flexible. And we kept doing the same thing, and I managed to win. I managed to defeat him twice in a row and win the tournament just by fighting arguably dirty, but adaptively? Words are hard. And sure enough, the moment that I was declared the victor, Aeryck went straight into the skit, which was, angrily, Captain Xavier, how dare you, you unchivalrous swine. And I was grinning ear to ear and trying not to, because it was just so cool that he was doing this, that he was willing to play that character, because he'd never been, Adria had never really done much of the role play. Probably occurs to me later on, anybody who's into medieval recreation probably has that somewhere. And for all I know, it was something he'd always wanted to do and there just wasn't enough of. And so he just went all out, and I'm, like I said, grinning ear to ear because I'd won and because he was doing this and trying not to smile and failing miserably. And when you get knighted in Adria, you're presented usually with a belt and spurs. A blue belt, and you're allowed to then wear spurs. When I got my first knighthood, I went with a spyglass and a sextant as my 2 knighting artifacts, because pirate. But this time I decided to go with the belt and spurs because I decided I was going to have something different for every one of my knighthoods, and then I could wear all of the accoutrements and just look ridiculous and fabulous. And so rather than being presented with the belt and spurs, I was bound with my belt and shackled with my spurs. is how it was described. I was forced to my knees and all of this, and it has come to our attention, and and it was really, really cool. And it really meant a great deal to me. He also told me that because it was me, and because it was a combat knighting, the final step of a knighthood is the blow unanswered, the last blow you take unanswered. And that's to represent that you are now a knight. You are now no longer lower class. You are now, people cannot trod upon you without answering for it. And so the last thing they do is they just give you a ceremonial punch. Let this be the last blow that you take unanswered. And it's usually just a light punch to the shoulder. Aeryck said, I'm going to hit you. And so I was like, well, then that's why I originally decided, well, let's do it at the end of the tournament when I'm still wearing my padded armor. Because when I stood up after that and he gave me the last blow unanswered, it not only knocked me back, it literally knocked the spurs off my boots. It was so cool. And then big manly Viking hug, and it meant a great deal to me. And far more than I realized even at the time, that those two things would stick with me until like I said, I was 24. I think I was Duke at the time. And I'd really gotten mired in the always having to win, always having to play the bad guy, the captain, and the ooh, and the brooding, and you know. Still hadn't kissed a girl at 24, which is tragic. And then I was watching a movie, Gods and Generals. And the character of Stonewall Jackson reminded me both of Aeryck and of another knight, Sir Mikos. He actually looked like Sir Mikos, but in much of his attitude reminded me of Sir Erik. And his policy, despite being the most chivalrous man in the show, and just an absolute model of chivalry and caring, and he was a teacher, and he was a father, and he was religious, and all of these things, he believed in no quarter on the battlefield. The black flag. Anybody who comes for a fight, they will get a fight, and there will be no mercy, there will be no quarter given. And that's when it hit me. I can do both. I can be ruthless on the field of battle and be chivalrous off it. Battle is a separate thing. Battle is a concept all of its own, and that's life or death, and that matters, whereas tournaments don't matter. And that very much shaped a lot of the philosophy that you hear me talk about in HVZ and in the auxiliary in general, is how emotionally involved you get in the outcome of something should be directly proportional to the consequences of failure. So losing a tournament, nothing bad happens. People aren't going to think less of me. People aren't going to shame me. I'm not going to, lose my title and not get to play anymore because I lost a tournament. It has no negative effect on anything other than possibly my pride, which is not something that's actually that valuable. Whereas a lot of the wars that we fought were crown wars, especially when the crew formed and we were getting hired for things. We were determining who the next emperor would be, who the next king would be, who the next duke would be. And that could matter because that could very drastically change how the game is played for the next year. And so in things like Imperial Crown Wars, we took it to 11 and just everything we could bring to the field we brought, and absolutely just were unstoppable. But I started getting a lot more relaxed in tournaments and would fight with silly weapons, or I'd fight offhanded, or I'd, whatever, and I would lose more often because I was being silly and having fun. And the same way today, in that, things like the wars we have at Fort Borst, our monthly war, I don't get emotionally invested in the outcome of any given round. Nobody is going to remember 5 minutes after it's over whether I was on the winning team of Capture the Flag or not. And so I don't care who wins. I can just go and have fun, and every once in a while I actually try to organize the team and see, hey, how badly can we beat them if I actually try? Very badly. What do you know? But I don't do that, and I prefer now to actually help run the games and referee the games and set things up and help new people and on all of that. But things like End War or Ragnar Oktoberfest, where it's a once-a-year event and I've paid hundreds of dollars to go to this event, I'm going to be a little bit more emotionally invested, and I'm going to want to try to get as much out of that event as I can, last as a human as long as I can, really make my mark on that event, because if I get tagged 5 minutes in and get to play a zombie the whole time, I'm not going to have as much fun. Yes, you can have a lot of fun playing as a zombie, but I've got bad knees and a bad back. I don't make a very good zombie. And so I prefer to try to last as long as I can as a human, and so I try a lot harder. I put a lot more effort into that. I do things like, you know, found an international Nerf militia just so I can have an army around me. So yeah, that was Sir Erik's take on chivalry and all of that had a strong impact on it. It was another time where I realized that Aeryck saw, you know, kind of what was really in me. And unfortunately, his life ended up taking him out of the game before that shift happened. And I never really got the chance to thank him for what he had done for me and for helping me. And I kind of wish he'd gotten to see who I went on to become, because he was largely instrumental in that. So that is the story of how Sir Erik helped defend Captain Xavier's honor and help ultimately, largely create the Captain Xavier you all know and love today. So for next time, it'll be hard to follow that story, but we've got the Scots Raid War, because that was a good one. That was the first time we had a really good location. We actually got to lay siege to a Renaissance fair permanent village in their off time, and that was a lot of fun. We'll bring up the Second Holy War again, because we covered the First Holy War. And then I'm going to throw nerfing for autism back in, because it turns out I actually do have some footage of it and would love to do a video on it. If it doesn't get chosen, I will probably just release the video anyway. But those are the options. Link to the survey will be down in the description. Hope you enjoyed this. Thank you guys for watching. Train! Incidentally, one of the side effects of that life-altering epiphany I had when I was 24 was that within a few months, just after my next birthday, I did in fact end up with my first girlfriend. So at the age of 25, I finally kissed a girl, which is not cool. However, that first kiss was actually witnessed by a duchess and 5 knights, so that's kind of cool. On the other hand, as she would still happily tell you, she pretty much had to chase me down to get that kiss. Over a decade later, she still makes fun of me for that. It all makes for a great story, though, which someday I might tell you. But not today.